Hey there. In this video, I want to talk to you about sitting and how you sit, because how you sit can have a big impact on your pelvic floor. Many pelvic floors in our world are too short and too tight to work well. And part of that happens because of how we sit, because the way we sit can put them into this kind of constant short position. That actually goes along with the way that we tend to stand because of heels and because of sitting in chairs a lot. So check out my standing alignment video for some tips on how to put your pelvic floor in a better position when you stand. But for today, we're going to talk about sitting. You're going to need a half roller or a rolled up towel. A rolled up towel will work great for this. And I'm just going to turn sideways to you. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take your half roller and put it flat side up on the edge of a flat chair or your rolled up towel on the edge of your chair, and you're going to sit down with your sit bones on your object, okay? So kind of wiggle yourself around, get as comfortable as you can. If you're on a half roller, this will be a little easier, but it works on a towel too. What you're going to do is you're going to push into your feet and feel your lower back get round. So this is a position where our pelvic floor is shortened. That's just the way pelvises are. So now pull with your feet, kind of like you're pulling the ground towards you. Try not to let your chair fall over. And untuck your pelvis. This is called an untucking position. And see how your lower back has hollowed out a little bit now. And this position has actually widened your sit bones and put your pelvic floor into a more lengthened position. So you can try that a couple times. Let yourself push back, feel that tucking of your pelvis. Pull yourself forward, feel that untuck, push back, feel the tuck, pull forward, feel the untuck. And maybe you can even feel that your sit bones get a little bit wider once you're pulled forward into this untucked position. So this is actually a great place to sit for your pelvic floor, and your spine might like it as well. There's no absolutes in human bodies, but a lot of the time if you're really kind of pushed back in a chair, if you imagine you're on a couch sitting this way all the time, you're putting a lot of weight on your tailbone, which isn't really created to hold weight. Your sit bones work really better for bearing weight. So sitting on the edge of your chair, maybe on a half roller or a rolled up towel, and letting yourself rock forward into this more neutral position is going to be more ideal for your pelvic floor from a long-term perspective, especially if you have a hypertonic, too tight pelvic floor. This is also a great place to use more core activation. So once you're in this kind of slumped forward position, you're not using your core muscles the same way that you would be if you're untucked like this. So this is a great alignment from the point of view of your deep core muscles as well. Let's head down to the mat, and I'm going to show you how to figure out kind of exactly where to be. Okay, so the tools that I use to assess pelvic neutral are my hands and my landmarks. So my first landmark are my hip bones. Speaking strictly, these aren't your hips at all. This is the top of your pelvis. And you might be able to feel them if you kind of put your hands on your hips like you're going to yell at someone and squish around with your fingers, and you're going to find some pokey outy bits right at the front. And those are technically called your ASIS. Or anterior superior iliac spine, if you want the full word. And those are landmarks for where your pelvis is in space. You also want to find your pubic bone, so the hard bony bump right in your center, right before you get to your pelvic floor. So those are kind of three landmarks. They can be hard to find when you're sitting up, especially if you're a little, if you've got some more flesh there. So we're going to try finding them lying down. You can put something behind the back of your head here if you like. And you're just going to take your hands and again, pretend you're going to yell at someone and feel around your pelvic bones here. And you can really kind of give yourself a little massage and see what you notice under your hands. And think of this as getting to know your pelvis. And to be honest, the better you can feel your pelvis with your hands and the better you can kind of sense and feel where those bones are in space, the healthier your pelvis is going to be in general, because it's going to improve your brain's connection with that entire part of your body. So you want to find the bits that poke out the most in the front, and then you can head straight down from your belly button and find your pubic bone, the pubic symphysis. And those are the three kind of triangular points that you can use to figure out where your pelvic alignment is when you're sitting. So kind of, make yourself a mental map of that. Let's head back to our chair. Okay, so now that you've found your ASISs, your hip bones and your pubic bone, let's apply that to sitting. So maybe let's just start by sitting back in your chair, really lean back, and feel for those hip bones, feel for your pubic bone, and maybe you can even visually see that your pubic bone is going to be way ahead of your hip bones here. A neutral pelvis, you're going to find that your hip bones are pretty close to vertically aligned over your pubic bone. You don't have to be perfect, but that's kind of the end goal here. So let's head back to the front of our seat, grab your towel or half roller, wiggle around so your sit bones are on your thing, let yourself slump back, find your ASISs and your pubic symphysis, and then roll yourself forward so they're getting pretty close to vertical. So this is how you measure, kind of if you're in a great position for balancing your pelvic floor. It's kind of a centered position for your body. Doesn't mean you have to be here all the time, but being here less of the time is probably a good idea. So you're just going to kind of wiggle around and find that fairly neutral position. Now, quick tip here, if you want to stretch your hips, working with a neutral pelvis is also going to help. And that's because when your pelvis is neutral, you're going to actually move more of the load into your hip joints than into your spine. So what that looks like is this. You can cross your right leg over your left knee, and maybe you can see on my body, my low back is rounded, my pubic bone is way in front of my ASIS. I like to use kind of these karate chop hands to help me find my my alignment here, because if I just poke at my belly, it's hard for me to see. So sometimes making these kind of karate chop hands and using them as kind of parallel rulers can be helpful. It takes time to practice this, so give yourself time. But yeah, so here maybe you can see that my front hand is way ahead of my back hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll, or my left hand is ahead of my right hand, I guess. I'm going to roll forward here, and now they're kind of on top of each other. They're stacked. So that means that my hip bones, my pubic bone are stacked. I'm in a neutral pelvis, and I am indeed feeling more stretch in my hip. So you should try that. Give yourself a stretch with your pelvis tucked and then untucked to this kind of neutral position and see how that feels for your body. And I will bet you feel more stretch. So let's do the other side, because I don't want you to feel unequal. So you can cross your left leg over your right knee. And if this isn't a great stretch for you, then you can just skip it. But this is a nice one for many hips. So you can kind of come into this tucked position, which also could make this an easier stretch for your body. But then to kind of load the stretch into your hips, you're going to untuck your pelvis. You're going to come into that hip bone vertically aligned with pubic bone alignment, and you're going to enjoy your stretch there. And you can use this principle in basically any kind of hip stretch. If it's in your back, it's not so much in your hips. Okay? So this is how I recommend sitting most of the time when you can. And you can also use this on the floor. So let's head back down to the floor. To finish up here, I just want to remind you that pelvic neutral can be something you can use in a chair, but of course you can use it when you sit on the floor as well, which is something I advocate because it's such a great way to get a lot more movement into your day with zero extra time required. So if you find your ASIS and your pubic bone and you're sitting on the ground, you want to make sure that those are fairly vertically aligned on the ground also. Now that can be a lot harder on the ground, especially if you're sitting, say, cross-legged or with your legs out in front of you, because most of us don't have the right or enough capacity in the backs of our legs and our hips to allow ourselves to be in neutral when we're on the ground. So here, maybe you can see if I make my hands into these kind of karate chop hands, I've got one thumb on my pubic bone, one thumb on my ASIS. My ASIS is way back of my pubic bone. My lower back is rounded here. So what I would want to do here sitting on the ground is I would want to start adding things underneath my sit bones until I can get to a more neutral pelvis. So I probably would maybe want something even a little higher than this half roller to get to neutral when my legs are out straight. But my body likes it when my legs are wide out, so I can sit in neutral no problem in a V-sit like this. So you may have to play around with the height of your object when you're sitting on the ground, but this is such a nice place for your hips, your pelvic floor, your core. It's worth taking the time to find kind of the right amount of bolstering. And I've got a whole series on sitting on the floor on my YouTube that you can kind of head out and look at. I've got links in the caption. So that's floor sitting with pelvic neutral. So if you like this video and found it helpful, it's a bit of an introduction to my work on the pelvic floor. I have an entire course called Pelvic Floor Plus that you might want to check out, and I hope to see you there. Cheers.